So welcome to Is This a Trick Question? This is an effective exam series. It's part 1 of 3. Tonight we got some to cover. We're going to introduce kind of the whole series and the outcomes of that series, and then we're going to do a pre-test about essays and objectives. We're going to discuss some general tips about testing, and then we're going to kind of have a mid-webinar wake up and do another interactive item there and match some learning objectives with test items. And then we're going to talk about the technical quality and criteria for establishing technical quality in your tests. And finally, if we get to the end and we have time, I've got a little game. We all know that students try to guess on our tests, especially in multiple choice. So we're going to see if we can guess how to defeat student guessing.
Hey, Ellen.
Yeah.
Is there a way, because on the side of the screen, like we have, like I have like the everyone who's participating, but it's kind of blocking some of your slides.
That's what I was just looking at. Okay, if you go to the top of that, there should be a bar and there should be like a line, like a minimizer. That's what I just did to mine.
I have a hide the thumbnail video. Yeah, I think that's what we're looking for. Let me try that. Yeah, that did it.
Okay, all right. I don't know if you heard me whispering, but like I got to move this out of my way.
Yeah.
All right, so the content from this webinar series comes from Is This a Trick Question? And it's an information source book for writing effective test questions, derived from the standards developed by the National Center for Research on Evaluation Standards and Student Testing, CREST for short. They did this research and established 7 areas of technical quality, including cognitive complexity, content quality, meaningfulness, language appropriateness, transfer and generalizability.
Hey, Ellen?
Yeah.
Everything just disappeared over here.
Oh no, well you've done something to your screen. Does everybody else see?
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Anyway, you can see the list of the criteria, technical quality criteria that they pulled out of their research.
Right.
So the outcomes for this entire series is we're going to learn how to apply principles to develop and use assessment methods in teaching and avoid common pitfalls in student assessment. We're going to identify and accommodate the limitations of different informal and formal assessment methods, because every method has its strengths and weaknesses, and we'll dive into that a little further. And then we're going to analyze instructional goals to select a compatible assessment approach. So is everybody ready to try this out?
Let's go.
All right. So what you're going to use is this information on the left side of your screen. And we've got 2 things we're talking about right now: objective items and subjective or essay items. So these are types of test questions that you would have. The one thing you need to remember about objective items is that the student action is for them to select or supply. That's their job when they're taking that type of test question. And you can see the types of tests, questions that are underneath that title. The second one is students' original answer. So they're going to organize and present an original answer. They create their own. So those are the 2 item types or types of test questions that we've got categories for. And what you're going to see here in just a second is a poll is going to pop up on your screen. You will be presented with 4 true, false, or unsure questions. Unsure does not imply that you don't know. What it means in this case is that research has yet to determine whether the proposition is true or false. You will have 30 seconds for each question. If everyone completes the poll before 2 minutes, I'll close the poll and we're going to discuss the answers. So, here we go. I have launched the polling. All right, we're done. Good job, everybody. I'm going to end the poll. And now I'm going to share the results. Can everybody see the results?
Yep.
All right, so let me tell you what the research says. Essay exams are easier to construct than our objective exams. The research says true.
Wow.
It says essay exams are generally easier and less time-consuming to construct than our most objective test items. Technically correct and content-appropriate multiple choice and true-false items require an extensive amount of time to write and revise. All right, number 2. Essay exams require more thorough student preparation and study time than objective exams. Now, it looks like the group here, most of you all said false, but the research has yet to show this. It is unsure. It is still undetermined whether or not essay tests require or facilitate more thorough or even different student study preparation. What do you think about that?
Well, my guess would be, I mean, if you're doing an essay exam where you're having to find evidence and provide evidence to support your answer, that would take a bit more time than like a multiple choice kind of A, B, C guess kind of situation.
I would think so too. That was my original thought as well. I was just trying to compare it to like I guess it would depend on student effort. You know, if a student is really trying at that multiple choice test and it's well constructed, they are still doing just as deep as thinking. But to me, that's a lot of variables to have in a row.
But Ellen, essay, I mean, they'd have to know how to put 1, 2, 3, and 4 together.
Right.
Synthesize and organize that in a coherent paragraph form.
Yeah, I'm going to have to say I disagree with the research. And I do think essays are they took me a little bit longer to get ready for. So number 3, essay and objective exams can be used to measure the same content or ability. The majority of you got that right. The answer is true. They can measure similar content or learning objectives. Research has shown that students respond almost identically to essay and objective test items covering the same content. All right, number 4, essay exams teach a person how to write. And you all said, most of you said false, and you are correct. Essays don't teach a student how to write, but what they can do is emphasize the importance of being able to communicate through writing. So that's that.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions?
Maybe it should have been essay questions can teach.
There you go. Now you see, you already know how to construct a test. All right, let's move on. The next thing we're going to talk about is when to use essay or objective tests. And this is, we're like halfway through here of our items of the night to get through. So I think we're doing pretty good. Here they said essay tests are appropriate when the group to be tested is small and the test is not to be reused. Or you wish to encourage and reward the development of students' skill in writing. Or you're more interested in exploring the student's attitudes than in measuring his or her achievement. Now, I'm going to have to disagree with that statement. How about you guys? Because I still think you can really measure achievement through writing. How do you all do that in your class?
Well,
I think, oh, go ahead.
You first.
I think that if you're not looking at necessarily quality of writing, you know, we're not trying to, unless it's a writing class, we're trying to get them to say what they know in an essay question. And it sometimes offers up you an opportunity to see more of what they know than in a multiple choice or even short answer.
That's very true. Very true. Tom?
Yes, I'm here.
You can go now.
Well,
He's blacked out. I can't see him.
you'll laugh. I'm at my dad's apartment right now, and it's like a senior living place. So like somebody was like talking to me while you were talking. So you got to do what you got to do.
Tom, that's okay. I'm in the cleanest room of our house.
Oh, yeah. Well, the only thing I was going to say was that, with the essay tests, if there's a rubric in place that is very specific about what the expectation is for that essay response, I think it can be something that reflects achievement.
That's true. That's true. That golden rubric, they always kind of come in and save the day for achievement within writing. That's excellent. That's excellent. So, go ahead.
What now?
Yeah, you go, Delphino.
Okay, I'm looking down there on that bottom one, interested in measuring attitude more than achievement. In biology, I would tend to disagree with that. But it depends on the course. Maybe if it was a philosophy course,
yeah,
I would agree with that, but not in biology.
No, you need to know the facts, what y'all getting to, right?
Yep.
But I think it depends so much on the content. So many of these questions and whether or not you would use an essay test or objective multiple choice might depend on the content. And there's some that are more process and skill kinds of things that you need to test versus content knowledge. And that might
I agree with you 100%.
But then again, now maybe what if you posed that test question, the essay, and said, pretend as if you were Charles Darwin, and what would Darwin be thinking? XYZ.
Huh. Interesting.
That's I don't know the answer to that question, Delphino. I wasn't a really strong science student.
Actually, what you're touching on is a method in writing that we call raft, where you take on a role and you're writing to a particular audience about a topic in a particular format. So to say you're Darwin writing to, an opponent or, to his theory, I mean, you could very well have some attitude as well as factual material built into that.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, we're going to move on. I have these timed out. We have a couple minutes.
What time is it?
It's only 7:14.
Oh.
But we got more games to play.
Okay.
The objective tests are appropriate and besides, there's going to be more debate in these other two columns of that, I am sure. So objective tests are appropriate when the group to be tested is large and the test may be reused. Highly reliable scores must be obtained as efficiently as possible. Impartiality of evaluation, fairness, and freedom from possible test scoring influencers are essential.
Boy, you either got it right. It's either A or B.
Yeah. And that last one, the impartiality doesn't happen if you have that golden rubric. So to me, that one is out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go back to if we go back to students and what their abilities are too, that kind of threw me when you were telling us that there's no difference in how you test knowledge. But if, definitely in school, I much would rather have an essay test, and that's where I could probably show more of what I know than like a multiple choice test because of what kind of learner I am. And on the multiple choice tests, often I would analyze and, question myself out of the right answer often. Do you know what I'm saying? Where you had the opportunity to explain your thinking on an essay test.
Yeah, but then again, that's why a lot of times tests have combinations of all types.
Right.
Well, and now you're getting into the great tips I'm going to give you later. You all have already done it. No, those are some really good points, and I completely agree with you, Jennifer. It is content dependent, and the student's strengths and weaknesses that determines the success of the test, basically. And then for either or, it says you can measure almost any important educational achievement with either of them. With either of them, you can test understanding and ability to apply principles, think critically, and solve problems, which I think all of those are generally pretty true. They pretty much define what tests do. All right, so we're going to get a little bit more into just general tips about testing. And these, again, are recommended by CREST. They said, in theory, more items a test has, the more reliable it is. And reliability is important, I think, in a lot of aspects of data collection and assessment. So on a short test, we all know a few wrong answers can screw everybody up. And then on a long test, too long, wrong answers don't influence the results as much. And if a test is too long, all of a sudden, especially if your kids are doing the same types of test questions over and over and over again, they just poop out on you and quit responding. So if you have a long test, it is recommended that you divide it into sections with different kind of tasks to switch it up a bit. Make sure your tests provide clear, concise instructions. It's often useful to provide an example of a worked problem if it's appropriate, which helps the students understand exactly what's necessary. And that may or may not be a good idea, considering you're really trying to test them what they know and not jog their memory of it. However, I think the point that they're trying to make is what seems to be clear to the test writer may be unclear to someone else. And to me, that's really important when you're laying out the instructions. It's often advantageous to mix up the types of items on a test and mix up the types of exams, whether it's a performance component, a written component, because that way you are assessing, number one, the knowledge in different directions, but you're providing students with different sets of strengths and weaknesses to shine. Test early. It is helpful for instructors to test early in the term and considering discounting the first test because students often need a practice test to understand the format that the instructor is using and then in turn be able to better prepare for the test. And I wanted to ask your opinion about that. What do you think about testing early and just giving an example of what they can expect?
Well, I mean, is that like saying you're going to have 4 tests that semester, but you drop one, or do you just drop the first one?
I mean, I don't know. There's multiple ways to set it up.
I think if you're testing student knowledge and or, processor skills, then you have to factor out the testing setting. Like that's not something you're assessing. So if it's confusing or if you have students who have never taken a multiple choice test, then you have to give them practice with that test taking skill because then you're not wanting that to be part of what you're assessing, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes total sense.
Students' prior experience with whatever kinds of tests you're giving.
And it's funny that you bring that up because I find out that, there's different caliber of students in class. Mm-hmm. And it's those A students that want to figure out, if you're going to give multiple choice, can you give us examples of the types of multiple choice?
Yeah.
And I've done that. Mm-hmm. And they sit there and go, I'm glad you gave us 10 sample questions to help us figure out what, you're going to actually do when it counts.
Because the anxiety would factor in there. A lot of your top students, I think, are the ones often the most anxious.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So I do a little bit of both. I do weekly quizzes. They're like 5 questions but I make sure that they're the same kind of like structure that I would give on an exam.
Right.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
and my first exam is always worth fewer points than the rest for the semester. Not by a lot, by maybe 40. I do like crazy numbers of points in my class. It's like 1,000-point semester. So my first test is like 40 points short of the most weighty test.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
and it's because of what you were saying, Jennifer. Like, this is the first time I tell them, this is the first time you've had an exam in this topic and with this professor, so you get a little bit of a break,
Yeah.
so it doesn't ruin your life, the first one.
So who is that talking?
Cynthia Ryder.
Oh, is that teacher of the year?
Oh my Jesus.
Go away.
Of course she would already be doing that.
Oh,
I mean, why am I even here, John? I'm so good. What do I possibly have to learn?
That's
we're going to have
awesome.
something to talk about on the way to ASD.
That's right. So the other things they tell us to do is to test frequently. Testing frequently helps students avoid getting behind and provides instructors with multiple sources of information to either use in computing for the final grade, thus minimizing the effect of bad days. And but it also gives you and the student regular feedback. And then this I think is a great, and until I got into the world of online learning, I wouldn't have thought about this, but checking for accuracy. You know, we use test banks around the house, and we got to be careful with those and make sure that they are accurately representing the appropriateness for the course. So, you know, we can't just blindly throw up our test banks. And then, of course, you definitely want to check any tests that you create for accuracy, because I think we probably have all experienced in our lifetime when that has happened and the repercussions of an error on a test.
It's called stroke out.
Yeah, struck out. So, proofread exams, to me, misnumbering, I don't know why they doubled up on that one. Oh, I did the wrong one. We'll skip that slide. All right, time for a mid-webinar poll, okay? So certain items, certain test item types are better suited for others, measuring particular learning objectives. And you know for a fact that you can't get through a webinar without me mentioning a learning objective. For example, learning objectives requiring the students to demonstrate or show may be better measured by performance test items, whereas objective items requiring the students to explain or describe may be better measured by test items. So to further illustrate this principle, you're going to be presented with several sample learning objectives, and then you have your list of appropriate test items right here on the left side of your screen. Match the most suitable test item with each of the learning objectives. You will have 30 seconds for each question. If everyone completes the poll before 2 minutes, I'll close the poll and we'll chat. All right, you guys see the results?
Yeah.
All right, so according to the answer key, name the parts of the human skeleton is an objective test item. Number 2, cite 4 examples of satire that Twain uses in Huckleberry Finn. It is an essay test short answer. I would think essay extended response. That's a tough call. That's not what the answer key says. Number 3, demonstrate safe laboratory skills. Definitely a performance test item. However, I can see how you could write it out and explain it. Describe the impact of a bull market. C, essay test item, extended response. So good job, everyone. There any comments about this at all?
Nope.
All right, rolling on.
Yes, hold on.
Oh,
I'm back,
okay.
kid.
Say
The
what?
impact of a bull market on what? That is, if it were more specific of a question, I would
Oh.
have said extended. But it
Oh.
almost sounds as if you're just saying describe a bull market.
Well,
Or
and
even,
then
what the heck do I know about that? But what do I know? But,
I don't know anything about it, but I can see how that question falls short of an entire explanation.
granted, that's just me playing devil's advocate.
Credit is given. Like, I agree. All right, let me get that out of here. All right, now we're moving on to those 7 criteria for establishing the technical quality of a test. In general, test items should assess achievement of an instructional objective or of your instructional objectives. Measure important aspects of the subject, concepts, conceptual relationships in the spirit of my procedural faculty who are here, mathematics, biology, science, everybody has their procedures. Accurately reflect the emphasis placed on important aspects of instruction. And I want to think about that one for just a second.
Which one?
Accurately reflect the emphasis placed on important aspects of instruction. So
What does that mean?
that's why we're going to think about it for a little bit.
Really?
Yeah. So, you know, when you're sitting there teaching and you're emphasizing something, and then all of a sudden your test doesn't reflect what was emphasized in the classroom, you've thrown your students for a loop. Now, I realize that we do put those killers on there every now and then, but generally speaking, and I think this is brought up either in this, I don't know if it's in this one or I've been preparing for the whole series here, but one of the points they make is that implicit teacher actions way more than this is what's on the test. Like, they listen to you in class. So you want to make sure that you're emphasizing the things that are not superfluous to the exam that you're about to slam them with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but let me just, I get asked quite often, what are the major things and what's the major emphasis here? And I catch myself a lot of times saying, basically everything that comes out of my mouth is important and it's all interrelated, because if they want to look at just what's emphasized, that's how they study, and they lose a lot of other detail.
I agree. I agree.
Let me ask a question. If as I'm reading this, and it's saying accurately reflects the emphasis placed on important aspects of the instruction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just the information that they're talking about is being emphasized, it's your style of teaching. Am I right?
That's what I was wondering. That's why we're having this discussion. And Delfino, and with all respects to your all's subject matter, which my daughter is majoring in, it all is important. And there's no possible way that you can cover every little cell or whatever it is that you cover. There's just no way. It is up to them. And you do have to kind of throw it back on the student. But so to me, that's a given. Tom, what you said is, I think this goes back to the implicit inferences our students take from us, is if we're standing up there preaching about, red, and then all of a sudden our test is mostly questions about yellow, I think that's the difference that we need to discern. But in the case of biology, if your emphasis is red and you have red and yellow and, you know, it's evenly distributed with the emphasis, you know, how does that, I don't know. Like,
I don't know. That gives me food for thought. So
I know, me too. Me too. That's that. When I read on that a little bit, I was wondering, Jennifer, what do you think about that?
I'm still not sure what they mean also by the, you know, how to read that, because above it they talk about measure important aspects of the subject. So you think about content. And so I'm like thinking now about what Tom said, if what they mean about important. I don't know how they're defining important aspects of
Emphasis.
instruction. Yeah.
I think that word emphasis is, well, I do think there have been times in the past where people have gone and placed a lot of emphasis on one particular subject matter without saying what John says. You have to know all of it. And so
Let's
to
see.
me, that is misleading the student.
You know, we
But-
were talking, I'm trying to remember where it happened, but you were talking about the performance task, right? And let's
Mhm.
say I'm in physiology and I have a human skeleton, right? And in my instruction, I'm literally doing a performance act. I'm pointing, I'm having to point these, you know, different bones out, these different joints and so on. That's the aspects of instruction I'm doing are performance based. And then I give them a test.
I think
Well,
that's
just
what it means.
fill
Yeah.
in the blank or true false. And it's like, well, that doesn't really match how you instructed them.
That is true. You know
You
what
know,
that goes back to is the verb in your objective.
where we get this idea of emphasis, this issue of emphasis is in A&P 2, Anatomy and Physiology 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I go in there openly and I tell them, A&P 2, it's not particularly hard if you start studying it, but it's such high volume
Right.
that they try to whittle at that volume
Yeah.
by asking for emphasis on subsets of material. So I get why they're doing it, but I try to tell them the reason you're learning all this stuff is so you can look at for interrelationships among the systems.
Right.
That's where I'm coming from.
Right.
Well, and I think that that's it. Like you can think about the depth and scope of your content, or how you instruct that content, how you teach that content, and how you test that content. So the teach and the test should be parallel.
Yeah.
You know, the depth and scope of content is superfluous, in my opinion, to that statement. It has to do with the strategies that you're using to teach that content. Excellent. Measure an appropriate level of student knowledge. I think, at least from talking to you all in the assessment program review thing we're doing, there is a very keen and astute paying attention to where people should be along the process. And you should pat yourself on the back for that. Vary in levels of difficulty, because we can't make it too easy, but we can't make it too hard. All right, couple more and we're about done. We're gonna play a game to see how students outsmart us. On the
Okay,
next,
I'll tell you a story. Okay.
I can't wait. That's why we
Okay.
gotta get through these so we can hear the stories. On the next two slides, we're going to cover the criteria establishing the technical quality of the test. Cognitive complexity. Basically, that's doing exactly what we were just discussing. Your test matches the instruction, matches the intellectual activity that you're requiring your students to do. Content quality. If an instructor has focused on the War of 1812 for most of the sessions and activities, then the emphasis should be reflected in the test. A test that covers a much broader period would be regarded as unfair. Now, in that respect, I call it true, especially if you spend 2/3 of the semester on War of 1812 and 1/3 on everything else. One would assume that your test is going to be mostly 1812. However, in biology's case, coming to the table and saying, basically, I only have this much time to cover this much stuff, but you need to know all of it, in my opinion, is fair. Meaningfulness. Research shows that less able students are heavily penalized by a failure to realize what is required for a test. Let me say that again.
Yeah, say that.
Yeah, research shows that the less able students are heavily penalized by a failure to realize what's required for a test. The more able a student seems to sense what the teacher wants, or less like, but, hold on.
So far, I'm agreeing with that.
Yeah, I mean, so how do we get those people to realize what is required? Like, what strategies do we do to make it meaningful to them besides your life depends on it?
I think it goes back to motivation, and kids that haven't experienced a lot of success in school, if, you know, especially testing, then if they don't think they can, then they're a lot less likely to try. So I think part of it is somehow putting them in successful places and testing those kinds of things, showing test items or giving practice tests, or like Cynthia saying, being upfront about the kinds of items because you're doing them in a quiz. So then the test just reflects what you've been doing on a weekly basis, all those kinds of things.
On a quiz basis, I started playing with, and I hadn't done it before, but with my in-seat students, I started playing with Quizlet, which is that program where it's like you can make they're flashcards.
Yes. Yep.
And for the less able student, they really find that helpful in helping them study for what's most important in the text, because the more able student seems to be able to pull that out.
Right.
So that's, I don't know if that's good, bad, or indifferent, but it's something I've been trying to do to help the less able student.
I'm not wondering, the more able student understands why the test is worth it. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's almost like a bigger picture issue when trying to address that problem.
But it could be that those students are thinking they're going to, they're very determined, and they know they're on their path to go to med school or vet school.
Right.
And the others are still just trying to figure it out. And so therefore they may not recognize the value and understand it yet.
Right. That's true too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tom, you brought up Quizlet. My fifth grader uses that at his school. They use it just for all the kids in his classes. Right. And, it just goes to show you what a novice I am as far as instruction goes. It never occurred to me to use that, and moving forward for those less able students, that's a tool that I think I'm going to start to employ next semester in the fall with my classes.
I've also
it's a great idea.
Well, thanks. I've also played around with, and it was at their own suggestion, that they were used to this Kahoot program, which is the same concept with an online game. So for the less able student, finding some other way to engage the learning, to prepare them for, of course, that does bring up not to question myself. I mean, I'm not presenting the test necessarily in that format, right? So right. Am I kind of breaking the rule here by saying?
I don't know. Like, how do you assimilate from Quizlet to exam ready? Because they are,
But strangely enough, what I've seen is the trend is the scores have been going up since I did it.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I think if you're using, and in my children's, and I'm not saying this, condoning this, but what I'm hearing a lot of teachers doing now is they're actually giving test items in Quizlet form, in Kahoot form, in review form, and then mix it up and use a different format and give the assessment. I don't think that's the way. I think you're just teaching to a test in that respect. Yeah, I don't necessarily think you're testing understanding or knowledge, but that is happening a lot, I think.
Well, and then that kind of leads to this last one, making meaning to the student based on their strengths and weaknesses. Um, the language you use in the test should also reflect the language that's used in the classroom.
Right.
And I think this is where test banks can kind of throw a loop, even for some of the better students, is, we teach it one way and this way, but the test bank's phrasing is a little bit different, but enough to throw them off. And of course, I would be remiss if not to mention that it should also be free of race, ethnic, and sexual bias, because we got to be careful about all that, and free and clear. Beyond those two things, you want the language to represent the language that's in the classroom, and you want it to be unbiased. The other language thing I think we have to deal with is people who don't speak English and who, come to our campus with that kind of barrier. At that point, it becomes a whole nother level of how to make it appropriate. And that's a whole nother webinar. All right.
No, that's hard. But then see, when that happens, I die. I mean,
Yeah.
my heart just goes out to those people.
I know, because especially with your language, it's a pretty precise, it's science, and you communicate in that language. I can see how that would send
I
heart
mean, that's when we only
palpitations.
had some of the Panamanians. I mean, I died. I mean, I really felt bad.
Right. And like, how do you overcome that as an educator? It's hard in that context. All right. Now, here we want to make sure that the technical quality of our criteria that we're assessing is transfer and generalizability. So, are your students, presentations, scenarios, and projects all add dimensions to assessment that your traditional tests can't. And teacher can make valid generalizations about achievement easier using those authentic assessments, performance-based. However, well-constructed tests, and I think this is the emphasis of what CREST is trying to impress upon us, is well-constructed tests, whether they be multiple choice or true false or, the objective essay type things, can transfer, and you can get a generalized appearance of the assessment of your student. They offer a few basic rules about fairness. You should reflect the objectives that you're teaching. Expectations should be clearly known. Each test item should be presented clearly in a formulated task, and one item should not aid in answering another. I'm going to disagree with that, because in mathematics, particularly, if you're working a student through a problem, one item does rely on another.
Mm-hmm.
So
I see that a lot in my curriculum.
Like, for every action, there is a reaction. Like, you're not going to negate that. Ample time for test completion should be allowed. And I think that's important to consider. We got so much time and so much content to cover. And I know we're sending these people out into the real world to perform in our subject areas. But I don't think that the emphasis of testing should be time. And there's a balance there. What do you all think about that?
Well, I often, it's a little bit of a parable, but if I say if a person climbs a mountain in 10 hours and another person climbs a mountain in 5 hours, they both climbed a mountain. So if there's ways to allow for more time for a student that needs more time without other resources, I don't have a problem with it.
I do that in my classes. I've got a couple of students that need probably an extra 10, 15 minutes on an accounting exam. And so I have allowed that in the past, just to accommodate their needs. So I don't have a problem doing that.
But do you do that under the umbrella of equitability and then and open that up to everybody?
I do. I
Yeah.
do.
Then I'm good. I'm good with that.
Yeah, no, I make that known to everybody, and that's an expectation or that's a point of emphasis that I make at the outset of every semester too.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All righty. And then reliability. The whole point of testing, folks, is to encourage learning. We talk about it from our point of view, which is assessment, do they know it? But from a student side of things is, are we encouraging them to continue learning? A good test is designed with items that are not easily guessed without proper studying. It is possible to construct all types of test questions what aren't readily guessed and therefore require a student to comprehend the whole material. We also want the test to represent what the students know and what they don't on a consistent basis. Any other comments about the technical quality of the test? Are there any tips or tricks that you would like to provide? All right, let's play a game.
Sounds good.
All righty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on the screen the way students try to guess their way right. And then you guys are going to provide how you would usurp that problem. And then we'll see what is recommended. Okay?
Yep.
All right. Pick the longest answer.
Make them all about the same.
Okay. I think that's exactly what I would do.
I say it again.
I would make them all about the same length. There is no
All right.
answer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
Make the longest answer wrong.
There you go. You got it right, Dan. Make sure the longest answer is right about a fifth of the time if you have 5 alternatives. So you could spend time making
Oh
them.
my gosh.
You have to have a lot of time on your hands.
I know.
Or you just selectively pick when the longest answer is correct. All right, number 2. Never pick an answer which uses the word always or never in it.
I make an answer be correct that whenever I have a statement, I can truly say always or never. I always use it to try to trip them up. Like, how confident are you? It's hateful, but I do it.
No, it's what you are when you are a teacher. You're good. Anybody else? All right, what do they say? Again, make sure such answers are correct about a fifth of the time. So, Cynthia, what that means is that you do that once and you don't ever do it again.
Automatic.
Oh, God. Oh, good grief.
All right.
Too much math to make a test.
I know, right? You have to have a whole spreadsheet to figure out what your answers were and are. If in doubt, guess.
See, they could do that in my class, but when they get to writer, that'll never work.
True. Very true.
So how do we keep that from happening?
I don't give completely multiple choice tests. Like you can't always, granted, I tell them, don't you dare leave anything blank. You
Right.
answer every question. I would rather them guess than not answer, but either I pick every word starts the same in a multiple choice question or has a similar structure to the word,
Right.
or they're not on multiple choice. So how are you going to
Even
guess?
multiple choice, I would tell you, of course you guess.
Yeah.
All
If-
right. Use more alternatives so you have more answers. So,
Yeah,
you know, they don't get into that pattern. So I guess like question 3 could have 5 answers. Question 4 could have 3 answers, and then you throw them all for a loop. They wouldn't know whether to choose B or C.
I need to try that next time.
Well, what about the test question A and
Oh
B,
my
but not
goodness.
C, you know?
I know
Yeah.
it's not.
Oh God, that just gives me the willies because that's what it's all about. And you can select the correct answer, but they want the AICPA wanted the best answer. It's like, oh,
Ew.
boy, this.
Yeah,
for
bet,
words.
bet.
Yeah, you can give partial credit on multiple choice results too. So,
That's true.
yeah.
Especially when you use the word best in the sim.
My thing is this, and this is just my opinion probably, but you know, when they're taking a test or they're taking, you know, especially with an exam, I don't want to ever have a sense that I'm trying to trick them into getting the wrong answer or anything like that. You know, I want it to be an honest reflection of their knowledge.
Right.
Yeah.
So sometimes when we talk about what can I do to make sure it's harder, I'm kind of like, if it doesn't have to be completely, you know, hard to understand, you know, couldn't like simpler kind of answers to the question be provided?
Well, I agree, and I am not a trickster at all when giving exams, but I have been a student before, and I have tried every single one of these.
But Ellen, the downside of that is, you know, a student may sit there and say, well, we really cued in on Ellen and she would never lead us astray, and therefore this is the answer.
Well, I think we need to keep them on their toes, point blank.
Me too.
Yeah.
So just to say the questions need to be presented in a thought-provoking way.
Right, there you go. That's exactly what we're saying. All right, next one. That's perfect. Like, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Pick a word which you remember was related to the topic.
I
Now,
don't want them to stop doing that, though. I want them to, if it's related to the topic, maybe it's partly right.
Right. No, I agree, but
Yeah.
I've done the same thing.
Please put something down. Yes, just anything.
All right. Here you go.
See, trans everything. It works.
Let's see, when driver distractors use terminate from the same. But distractors use those. Yeah.
So what I got out of that suggestion is it's okay this one is not tricking them because you are using the word incorrectly, and therefore they should recognize that.
Right.
Yep.
I
Yep,
think this is
totally.
a fantastic strategy,
Right.
and I would employ it, but I don't plan on creating multiple choice questions anytime soon in my future. Just faculty development.
Insert the word always in the answer.
That's true.
What was that, Dan?
Insert the word always in the answer,
There you go.
or never.
It's going to be in my final every question.
If there are two answers which express opposites, pick one or the other and ignore all the alternatives. And before we even think about this one, let me tell you, I remember when I was a junior in high school, which is a far stretch, and this was a strategy that was given to me in the ACT prep class that I took.
I think what I'm getting is this. If a student doesn't know, they just don't know, and yet they can still do some of these things and get credit for knowing it, that's a problem.
Yeah.
It's like you may get a better score, but you still don't know it. So in a
Right.
case like that, don't express things in such a binary way.
Right. So rephrase your question.
Right.
All right, let's see what the research says. Well, there you go, Cindy, or Cynthia.
Oh, that's the way. Yes.
Yeah.
Never or always. Neither one.
That's awesome. All right. So now next time we are going to get into like the technicalities of creating multiple choice, true, false, and matching questions. So we'll spend some time on each type of question. We kind of hit a general overview this evening. And we'll have more interactivity. And does anybody have any questions?
Well, can you send me that link?
Yes, I will send it directly to you. When we hang up here, I'll put a meeting invite in my inbox.
Yeah.
I'll send it. Yes, absolutely. You might have to call me and let me know.
All right.
All right, is there, okay. Thanks, guys. Does anybody else have anything? I appreciate you all being here, and I've had an enjoyable evening.
Yeah, it's been good.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thanks, Ellen.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Yeah, that's it.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody.
Have a nice evening, everybody.
Good night.
Take care.
We got to stop meeting this way.
Hi, guys.
Bye.